Welcome to the Business Results Program. This is how to transform yourself, your team, and your company to perform better and achieve higher results. Let's get started. I'm so happy you're here. My name is Pete Winarski, and I'm the CEO of Win Enterprises, LLC. Check out CompleteBusinessTransformation.com and look at the latest posts and resources we put there to serve you. I started this program because I want you to know that it doesn't have to be that hard. Business leaders like you struggle to get results, to build your team, to satisfy customers, to grow your businesses, and to stay sane in the middle of these crazy dynamics going on around you. My team and I have had full careers in business leadership roles, and we get it. We've had the same challenges as you, and we can share what we've learned, and we can make your life easier. In this program, I will be joined by various members of our team and other guests that I know can help you. We will offer new perspectives and share some of the secrets that you're just not hearing about anywhere else. The Business Results Program is your personal journey to improve yourself as you improve your company and achieve your most important goals and deliver the business results that make you and your team happy. Now, let's get to today's episode. Hey, Pete Winarski here, and I want to share with you the guest that we will have on today's podcast, Rabbi Yonason Goldson. And Yonason is an incredibly articulate and fun and intelligent and just really a well-balanced human being, I'll have to say. I'm so happy to have him as our guest today. He has written multiple books, including Fix Your Broken Windows, which is about ethical affluence. It's about another book, Grappling with the Gray, which is ethics and business prosperity. He does keynote speeches. He's been a TEDx speaker. He talks about leadership and ethical leadership. He writes for Fast Company magazine, just all around a solid contributor. And I'm blessed to have time with Yonason today. Enjoy this podcast conversation. Everyone, Pete Winarski here. I am today with Rabbi Yonason Goldson. And Rabbi Goldson, you go by multiple names, and I'm just going to play with this right out of the gate because you shared with me that some of your advising base suggests emphasize Rabbi, and others say no, don't bother bringing that in. So we're going to call you both, and therefore please both camps. How's that sound today?
Well, my father always said, just don't call me late for dinner.
That's right. Welcome.
Thank you. You know, it is an interesting point that you're raising, that because I speak on ethics, I want to leverage the moral authority of being a rabbi.
Right.
However, when people see rabbi, they may immediately think I'm going to start talking about religion, which I don't, at least not ostensibly.
Right.
And so there's sort of a tension there. And certainly in my community, where I am a community rabbi and everybody addresses me as Rabbi Goldson, but in the business world, we're all on first name basis.
Yes.
So I go by Yonason. And so I have a little bit of schizophrenia when it comes to this, but we get through it.
Yeah, it's almost like, I've been in those situations before where there was some sort of a tension or multiple ways that a discussion could go based on the individuals you're talking to. And you almost have to pause and just ask for clarity. Which conversation are we about to have? Or which conversation would you like to have? Once you know that, you put on that persona and off you go.
And that's really a critical insight for all of our interactions, is that simple communication, just asking for clarification.
Mm-hmm.
How would you like to be called? What did you mean by that?
Yes.
I'm not sure I got your point. Could you expand on that? I mean, these are very simple, natural expressions that just make it easier for us to interact with each other to make sure that we're understanding each other, especially in a time when, we're so politicized, we're so polarized, and everything is so easily interpreted as some sort of an attack. I mean, I'm very conflicted about the term microaggression. We used to just call it good manners.
Right.
So now it's a microaggression of bad manners. It's like some sort of a personal assault. Some people are just maybe a little bit socially awkward, a little socially clumsy. Presume positive intent is such an important rule to our social interactions. And if we practice that a little bit more, and we make the effort to understand others, to make sure others are understanding us, so many of our conflicts and problems would just resolve themselves.
Yeah, human dynamics are, there's a whole art form and a science behind that. So let's get into
the problem
ethics.
Is sorry. Part of the problem, here we are being polite to each other. Here we go.
No, part of the problem is this term, sir, after you.
Yes, thank you. This term soft skills,
right?
Which makes it sound, it makes them sound less important. But really, the foundation of everything. I've heard that some are starting to call them power skills, which I like, because it puts an emphasis on the need to have those, social sensitivities in the way we interact, because then everything builds on that, and we accomplish so much more, and we create win-win situations where everybody succeeds.
Yes, yeah, that's right. And ethics is only part of that equation, but I do want to make sure we get into ethics, because you are positioned as somewhat of an expert in the field, whether you call yourself that or not. I will, right? Yonason, you are an expert about ethics, and you've written a number of books. I want to give you some credibility there with, a couple of them I'll just call out attention to. Fix Your Broken Windows. I love that. Ethical affluence being the theme there. So I want to make sure we talk about what that means. Grappling with the gray. That is a wonderful imagery, because there are so many gray areas for us as business leaders. Here we are trying to do the right thing, and think of the dynamics that we have as someone in a leadership role who has responsibility to the company, and there's a expectations about profitability, and then we have our team of employees and our team of people who are here to get things done, and we have our customers who we're serving, and there are gray areas all over the place on a day-to-day basis, especially it seems the larger the company, but maybe it's not dependent on the size of the business. But certainly I have seen personally some of those gray area challenges when I was in business leadership roles for billion-dollar type organizations, as well as a consultant to large and small companies. So the gray areas are there, aren't they?
Well, yeah, and that's it's so important to cultivate that mindset, because we have a natural predisposition to relegate everything to black and white. We like binary choice. We want to keep our options simple. And this is part of what you see in our politics and the partisanship that is characterizing so much of society today. And it spills over into every aspect of our culture and our lives. And when things are black and white, they're relatively simple. But so much of life, as you say, is in that gray area. Not choices between right and wrong, but choices between right and right, or wrong and wrong. And we have to grapple with those nuances. I like to say there's no app for being ethical, because every situation is different. Every dynamic's different. And you can have the same situation for two different people, two different groups of people, and completely different desirable outcomes, or different valuations of how to make those choices. And so it's the gray areas that we need to build our ethical muscles, and it's the gray matter that we have to use. And one of my friends told me, and it's the gray that comes with experience, that we have to sort of learn from the wisdom that's available to us,
Right.
learn from our own interactions. The sages say, who is wise? One who learns from every person.
Mm-hmm.
And someone else said that everybody knows something you don't.
Which is a little bit different than thinking that I already know everything, which, it's a dynamic that we see with, it seems like the younger you are, the more you think you know. And then you know, I'm saying that with, some teenagers who are, dad, you don't know anything. I'm like, okay, well, you set me straight. Good luck. And I hope you, in a year or so, come back and have experienced what you need to experience. And I'm being a little bit overly harsh for illustration here because I have two wonderful boys who, from a place of ethics and strong sense of values and strong sense of right or wrong, they do have outstanding intention. And that, I think, is where things begin. So as we've been talking, you've hinted at somewhat of the context with shades of gray and grappling with the gray. Let's, just to get people grounded now, let's talk about what is ethics. I just use the phrase ethics and values in the same sentence. How do they relate, and what would you describe ethics to be, just so that we're all on the same page for the rest of the conversation?
Yeah, so that's it's very important to start with definitions, and I've been grappling with my own definition of ethics for a long time, and continue to refine it and assume that I will continue to do so. But at the moment, I'd like to define ethics as the discipline of recognizing and taking responsibility for the impact our actions have on others.
I love that.
And why is that so important? Because human beings are social creatures. And we live in a world with other human beings. And there's nothing we can do about that. Sure, you could be a recluse, you could go up on a mountaintop, but most of us aren't going to be doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And we tend to mirror one another. Some neurologists tell us about what they call mirror neurons, and there's some really fascinating insights that they've recognized. If I'm eating ice cream and you're watching me, the same neurons that are firing in my brain, giving me pleasure from the ice cream, are firing in your brain. And the only reason you're not getting pleasure is because your taste buds are sending a message to your brain saying, nothing's going on here, don't get excited.
Yeah.
But they've done tests where they've deadened the sensory receptors. They found that you can actually get pleasure watching someone else get pleasure,
Mm-hmm.
as if you were getting that pleasure yourself.
Right.
And in this context, I always quote King Solomon, who says, as water reflects one face to another, so too the heart of one person to another. So that means however I behave, it's going to have an impact upon you and your behavior. And to some degree, you're going to reflect that back at me. So if I make a most simple example, you're walking down the street, we can do this in the Midwest. It's harder in Manhattan, but you're walking down the street and I smile at a stranger coming by. What's likely to happen?
You get the smile back.
You get the smile back, right? Dolly Parton said, if you see someone without a smile, give them one of yours.
That's right. And you're probably accurate about some of the hustle bustle of New York City. You may not get a smile. You may get someone running the other way thinking you're crazy.
Well, there's that too. But also, if you've got 400 people a minute passing you on the sidewalk, it's kind of hard to smile at everybody. But the bottom line is that we reflect one another. And so if I don't like what I see in those around me, the first place I should look is myself.
Mm-hmm.
And when I see qualities in others that I admire, I should ask myself, am I projecting that? Do other people see that when they look at me? Jim Rohn says you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And that is such a brilliant insight. It's so simple.
Mm-hmm.
It means the company we keep, the friends we have, the associations. It also means the media that we consume.
Yes.
Because there is so much negativity and if it bleeds, it leads. Yeah, they
Yeah, and
capture our attention with excess,
well,
with conflict. And so we absorb that, and then we take that into our lives, and then we wonder why everybody around us is so angry when we're really contributing to it.
you're indicating that there's choice involved, and that's a very mature concept that I think it's a challenge for people to sometimes recognize that when they are not happy or pleased or getting the results that they want or whatever, that they look at themselves. And back to the concept of your definition, where there's a discipline in some of the practices relative to the personal responsibility you're taking. And that responsibility, there's a lot of conversations. People who have listened to this program or have been part of our World and Win Enterprises know that we are students of Jack Canfield, who's one of our mentors, and we talk about the responsibility formula, our language for what he describes as there's the events that happen, but it's the responses to those events that really create our outcomes.
Yeah.
And you're describing that right now. So I'm connecting the dots for some of the listeners, because as whether it's because of the mirror neurons or because of recognizing someone else is putting out some good, happy, positive vibes, or getting pleasure from eating ice cream or whatever the case may be, that there's the unconscious side, which is the neurons firing in a mirror-like fashion where I'm enjoying because you're enjoying. But then there's also, given a situation, which could be news or something that somebody is saying in a conversation, we still have the ability to respond to that and reframe it in a way that aligns with who it is that we want to be or the results that we want to achieve. So it's interesting because I tend to be someone who puts a little bit of a barrier to negativity, and I just don't allow it in. Does it get in sometimes? Of course, right? Do I, if I have, a negative energy person around me, I'll do my best, but I may get fatigued and allow, that to impact me at some moment. The point I want to make, and I want to turn this into a question in a moment, is really that we have some choice involved. We have a personal responsibility to how we respond to the world, not just about from an ethics standpoint, which is choice in what we do or say relative to right and wrong, back to the black and white versus shades of gray, but also just in how we show up and behave on a day-to-day basis. So go ahead, share some thoughts along those lines, because I think you're onto something here.
Well, I mean, you touched on a couple of points that I think are really worth fleshing out a bit. When you talk about being responsive, and this isn't really my observation, but it's just a truism that can't be denied. Most of us tend to be reactive more than responsive.
Mm-hmm.
And someone said that, think about the difference between responding to medication and reacting to medication.
One's not good, one is better.
Exactly. And that's where the responsibility comes in, because reflex is not often going to be the positive response. Again, what you said about trying to cultivate positivity, our reflexes, our habits, those require cultivation.
Mm-hmm.
One of our great sages, Maimonides, said that the key to a successful life is cultivating good habits, because the more you can relegate behavior to habit, then the more freedom of thought, freedom of choice, freedom of awareness is left for those situations that are unexpected. We talk about there's something called decision fatigue. Why do so many smart people do so many stupid things? Well, a disproportionate amount of those stupid things happen late in the day.
Right.
Because the famous story about Steve Jobs, he had always wore black turtlenecks and jeans because he didn't want to squander his emotional decision-making capacity on what clothes he was wearing.
He's not spending more than 30 seconds in that closet figuring
Well,
it
and
out.
there's no choice.
Yeah.
It's the same thing every
Grab
day.
and go, grab and go.
Yeah. Because when you've got to make tough decisions again and again and again, and people in leadership, people in influence, power, people who live complicated lives, which most of us do,
Yeah.
we get depleted. And then something comes along that should be a no-brainer, and maybe there's no brain left. We don't have the juice left to power the decision making to help us get through those. And so you can end up with catastrophes in your personal, professional life because you just aren't in a position to make that decision. And then at that point, the smart decision is, let me think on this. Let me sleep on this.
Mm-hmm.
Let me look at this with fresh eyes tomorrow, knowing when I'm not in a position to make a sound decision is also part of that responsibility.
Right.
Is the other word you use that's so important, because in our society today, we're so fixated on rights and we're not giving nearly enough attention to our responsibilities. If I'm demanding my rights and you're demanding your rights, we're going to be banging into each other again and again.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm taking responsibility for your rights and you're taking responsibility for my rights, everything's going to be smooth sailing.
That's a much different perspective than where many of us are, these days. You don't need to look very far. You just turn on the news and you will run into that. So we've talked about the gray and grappling with the gray. Let's talk about ethical affluence. What do you mean by that?
Well, just what it sounds like. We have a dangerous misconception that we buy into, that we have to choose between being good and being successful.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I can't afford to be ethical.
Mm-hmm.
And we have some of these expressions in our culture, right? Nice guys finish last, and no good deed goes unpunished. And it's really not true. It appears that way in the short term, right? Crime pays in the short term. It often does not pay in the long term. And in the ultimately long term, it never pays. When it comes to, let's say, a professional culture, a work culture, increasing statistics coming out that when there is a culture of trust, and where does trust come from? It comes from ethical leadership. It comes from having ethical values. When you have a culture that's built on trust, so workers are more engaged, employees are more productive, they're happier in what they do, they're more aligned with the company's mission, they're less likely to depersonalize coworkers, they're much less likely to leave their jobs, more likely to recommend others come work there. All of these metrics, I mean, the statistics are really quite astonishing. And that's aside from the fact that companies ranked highest for ethics grow fastest, have the most sales. In some cases, I think the recent study said 4 times the sales as companies that don't have an ethical culture. I mean, good ethics is good business. If we are willing to discipline ourselves to not focus on those short-term gains. Quarterly reports, hitting your benchmarks. Well, what if hitting my benchmark only comes at the expense of my long-term goals? Now I've just succeeded in setting myself up for failure.
Well, and Yonason, we've anyone in business who, especially in the corporate side or the publicly traded company side, has run into that sort of a dynamic and a challenging question. That's back to the grappling with the gray. And the discipline to stay the course for the long term is difficult when I've actually heard either from an old boss or a client where they're like, yes, however, I cannot miss this number. I must hit this target, right? The financial targets or the whatever it might be. And so, what advice would you have for a business leader who's in that position where they're like, I'm going to have to cut some corners in order to hit this number? What what guidance
Well,
can you give them in that process? Because I could tell you, we're all there. Business leaders are there. They have that challenge.
well, it's interesting you phrase the question that way. The advice for business leaders saying, I have to hit that number. Well, if you're the leader, isn't it up to you what number you have to hit?
For a small business, that's absolutely true. In a larger company, when you're somewhere in the middle, now you have a bigger challenge. So let's play
Yeah.
with that though, because I
Yeah.
I don't want to ignore and sort of brush away your challenge, because your challenge, worded a little differently, is listen, we all have choice to what we agree to sign up to do or not do. And if you're in a business role and you're being held accountable to some number, in the end, you still can position a conversation about longer term damage, right, wrong, um, sort of renegotiate um, your commitments in the short term, and et cetera. Now, having said that, some of the larger companies, corporate, heavy handed, thou shalt hit this number or else. What what kind of guidance can you give to that person who's they're a little bit stuck? What do they do?
Yeah, yeah. And I don't mean to diminish the challenge that individuals in that situation or that kind of situation face. I'd say let's take a step back and redefine what is a leader. Right? And I think of a leader as someone who is responsible for bringing out the best in others, in enabling and empowering and encouraging and inspiring others to develop and utilize their own potential in a way that is most beneficial to the community, to the organization, to the enterprise. And so if I'm in the middle, and let's face it, probably most of us are, just to some degree, right? So it's easy for me, let's say, relatively easy for me to lead the people below me, although it's more complicated than that too, because I have to, I can't simply be the drill sergeant. I have to get buy-in. I have to make my case so that everybody's on board, even if they disagree with the final decision. But there's been transparency. They understand how we got there. They understand why we're taking this position, even if personally I don't agree with it. But then I also have to lead upward by taking my case upstairs.
Yes.
By rallying my allies, by gathering my ammunition, which in this case may be data, may be reasoning, may be a successful sales pitch. And really, what is a sales pitch, or what should be a sales pitch? It should be demonstrating the value in what I'm offering, whether that's a product, a service, or advice.
Mm-hmm.
Which means I really have to know my own position, and I have to be passionate about it, because I have to articulate it in a way that it's going to get across that those who are perhaps the decision makers, if I'm not this decision maker, at least create the greatest possibility that the decision maker will consider what I'm selling, what I'm pitching, what I'm advising, take it seriously, and perhaps allow it to influence his or her decision making.
Well, I think anytime you can weave in concepts like ethics and responsibility into the practical matters of, hey, you leader, here's how you need to just really think about things a little differently to up your game, to up your influence, to up your impact, because you are reframing inside of yourself, then there's huge value there, and there's value to the listeners here. So I love this conversation.
Yeah,
So
I was recently asked in another interview, what was my my greatest leadership failure.
Mm.
And we don't like to dwell on our failures, but my mind went to a point where I was in a meeting discussing a proposal, and one of my closest ally in the middle of this meeting shifted his position dramatically. And we talk about reacting versus responding. I was really blindsided, and I just couldn't formulate the response that I came up with sometime later.
Right.
Now, would it have made a difference? I don't know. But I still regret that I couldn't put together the right response in that moment, because everything that inevitably would go wrong went wrong.
And this is where you pointed out at the beginning of this interview, we're in an environment where, as long as we're constantly learning, and that's a learning, so I look at a nugget like that and say, well, what did I learn from this? Next time around,
right,
you're more prepared. You're on, the alert for a situation because there's pattern recognition, and now you won't necessarily make the same mistake, if you will. You were asked about your leader, biggest mistake as a leader. So that that is a challenging question.
Yeah, and that's Churchill's famous definition of success, is going from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. So it's something we can take to heart.
It's the right environment. So just as we wrap up, what are some things that you would want to make sure that the listeners, largely business leaders, people who are really making an impact in the world through their company and through their leadership, so for their teams, we talk about transform yourself, your team, your company, for customers, and for even our extended families, how does ethics matter in such a way that you can sum it up in a piece of advice for that audience?
Well, Jim Collins in his classic Good to Great advises leaders, CEOs, presidents, don't hire for skills, hire for character. Because you can teach skills and you can't teach character. And so culture flows from the top down. If it's important for me to hire people with character, it's even more important for me to have character.
Yes.
So what is character? What are the qualities, the characteristics that define an ethical leader? So I use the acronym ethics. Starts with the E as empathy. Right? As a leader, I need to know my people. I have to understand what are what's their pain, what's their joy, what are their hopes and their fears, what are their aspirations? How are they receiving the message that I'm projecting, either consciously or unconsciously? The T is trustworthiness. So I have to be trusted, but in order to be trusted, I have to be willing to trust others. We know that micromanaging doesn't work. There's this expression that the best leaders do nothing. In other words, they empower their people to be the best they can be, and they keep everyone coordinated. So the culture of trust. The H is humility. I have to be willing to admit when I don't know something, admit when I'm wrong, and that's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of character, and it gives me credibility for those times when I need to assert that I'm right. The I is inquisitiveness, always learning. We just talked about that. There's always more to know. There's always more to understand. And there's always the possibility that my preconceptions or my dearly held beliefs may need reevaluation from time to time. And wouldn't I rather discover that I've been wrong than continue to be wrong? And that's why the C is courage, because it's hard. It's hard to be vulnerable. It's hard to admit mistakes. It's hard to ask for advice. Hard to risk looking weak or indecisive. But the courageous leader is one who uses every resource that he has or she has. And the S is self-discipline, because this is not a checklist that you go down once and you're finished. This is a process that you go through again and again and again. And each time try to hopefully start at a better point than when you started the last time. Over the course of our careers and the course of our lives, we become more and more ethical. We become more and more respected as leaders, and therefore have more leverage to influence the people we lead in a way that brings about universal success.
I love this description, and so many of these words where I have personally, or we as a leadership team at Win Enterprises, have thought about our values. There's the good news, and trust and humility, and the courage, especially. I just talk about courage. That's the difference between making a change and making something happen for the better than not. Like, you can get everything else. You could be aligned. You could say, oh, okay, mentally, I'm on board. I'm ready to accept someone else's position or accept that I was wrong or whatever the case may be. But if you stop there and don't take the next step, which could be an apology or, hey, team, let's rally. I've got an idea that I want to share with you, or whatever's the required next step. Some of those required next steps are uncomfortable, and they take a little bit of courage in order to pull it off. So I'm really glad to hear that word in this context.
Yeah, but you remind me of a story I heard a while back, a very disturbing story about a fellow who came into work. If I remember correctly, it was 13 minutes late. And his manager lit into him, dressed him down in front of everybody else, all his coworkers, told him, how dare you come in late, do this again, you're going to be fired. Well, as it turned out, this fellow had never been late before once. He was going through a very unpleasant divorce. He had some serious medical issues he was dealing with. And on this particular day, he just couldn't get it together in time to get there 13 minutes late. He was somebody who had frequently taken on extra work, who had frequently stayed late to finish jobs, and he made up his mind on the spot. I am never going to go 1 inch beyond what's minimally required of me. I mean, think about the damage done. Now, to your point, maybe the manager was having a bad day. Maybe he had a fight with his wife. Maybe he just got some terrible financial news or health news. But it didn't have to end there.
Right.
He could have come back the next morning and in front of all the same people say, I lost it yesterday morning. I was completely out of line. I want to apologize publicly for embarrassing Fred and tell him how much we appreciate him and everything he does for this company, and find some way, gesture to make it up to him. We all make mistakes. We all do things we shouldn't do. We're all human beings. So on the one hand, we have to cut other people a little bit of slack, but we also have to own up to it and that's what it means to take responsibility.
Right.
So that we can repair often the damage that we do if we handle it quickly and responsibly.
And you just illustrated courage, but you also included, without using the words, there's empathy as part of that.
Sure.
So your phrase of in fact, we can deconstruct that whole story and put each of the letters, that spell ethics into an illustration. Oops, excuse me. The idea of behaving at a higher level for the good of yourself, for the good of all, for the good of each other, I think is largely what's some of behind the whole concept that we're talking about here with ethics.
Yeah, and of course, one of the real challenges we have increasingly in our society is that so many of our political leaders do not act in a way that exemplifies these types of qualities. And they're the ones getting the airtime. They're the ones that we see acting out what is often incompetent leadership, failure in leadership, abusive leadership. My hope is that if we can transform the work community, the work culture, right? One thing we can all agree on, we want to make more money. And if you look at the numbers, again, good ethics is good business.
Mm-hmm.
If we take that long view, if we take the mature view, if we're responsible, not only will we be more successful in our businesses, but perhaps by changing the culture of business to be more ethical, that culture will seep out into the broader society, and we can start being having more hope that we can address some of these very serious problems that we face as a society.
Mm-hmm. So let's go with that as the way to wrap this up, as injecting ethics into what we do for the long term, to play the long game, will end up creating more money, better society, results for ourselves and our businesses and our teams, et cetera.
And our families.
And
this applies in the home.
Yes. Yeah.
Just as much as anywhere else.
Flowing back into our homes. So Yonason, thank you. Rabbi Yonason Goldson, this is a wonderful conversation. And I feel like we could continue this for another hour easily just by continuing to play. This is sort of that flowing coffee shop type style. And, I learned quite a bit, both reinforcing things that we talk about, but from another angle, and also new concepts injected into who we are here and what we do on Business Results Radio.
Well, thank you, Pete. It's been a pleasure.
I enjoyed this. Thank you, Rabbi Yonason Goldson. And all you listeners, please do take notes on this one. You may want to re-listen to this episode because there are quite a few golden nuggets that are important to pay attention to.
I'd encourage listeners to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm very active there. And visit my website, which is my name, Yonason Goldson, Yonason Goldson.com.
And I also encourage you to pick up some of Rabbi Yonason's books, Fix Your Broken Windows, Grappling with the Gray, and there are others. We just scratched the surface. So thank you again for being here, and thanks everyone for listening to this episode. Thanks for listening to this episode of Business Results Radio.